Welcome to today's video. I'm currently recording this in December, and with Christmas right around the corner, I had a friend recently ask me, what's the cheapest and easiest way to get into playing the older Pokemon games? And he gave me a perfect excuse to make this video. So this is for those of you in the same boat, wanting to play and experience the games for the first time, just replayed after many years, but not wanting to spend a small fortune and months of your time hunting down copies. Because I also see a lot of people who find themselves in the same situation as younger me. That is, the games they want are too far out of their reach. See, back when I was a young child who liked Pokemon, but had no income, back in the day and today, it boils down to cost and access. With secondhand games from the US costing between $25 and $200 nowadays, the games people want to play or just want to replay are too far out of their reach. And keyword is second hand, as you are only able to purchase a physical, genuine, authentic copy from the secondhand market. When I was younger, it was a similar situation. Games were available new on store shelves, but I could not afford to and was not allowed to purchase games at retail. Plus, I didn't have easy access to the secondhand market, especially since my parents didn't want to use gas money driving around to flea markets and garage sales. They couldn't afford higher than dial-up speeds on our internet, so I couldn't use any secondhand selling websites like eBay or Krikzz. Plus, my parents didn't want us playing video games in the first place. But joke's on them, because now I spend most of my time taking apart consoles to fix them rather than actually playing video games on them. But back to the topic at hand. We'll be focusing on Generation 1 for this particular video. That is Green, Red, Blue, Yellow, and Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2. Stadium 2 is included even though it's Gold and Silver because it's backwards compatible with the Gen 1 games. So yeah, if there's enough interest, I'll continue with Gen 2 for the GBC, Gen 3 on the GBA, Gen 4 and 5 on the DS, Gen 6 on 3DS, so on and so forth. But let's first try to get through this video. Before I talk about the options available though, I feel like I need to address the inevitable. I know there's going to be people jumping in the comments yelling about piracy this, hurting the game developers' wallets this and that, and oh, you need it. Okay, guys, it's been over 20 years since the boxes and the games have been taken off the store's shelves. The only people you're affecting at this point by downloading a ROM file online instead of tracking down and paying secondhand market prices for an authentic, genuine cartridge are the secondhand resellers, aka the price gougers asking the ridiculous prices for these games. Nintendo doesn't sell brand new copies of these games anymore. So that means the only person who makes 100% of the profit from the sale of the game in the current year is the person who is selling it to you. Not Nintendo, not the store, but the reseller who's selling the cartridge to you at this point. And I think it begs reminding. How much a game sells has no effect on what happens to the developers or anyone else who works on that game. Because usually, the people who work on the game are hired on as contractors. And when your contract is finished, aka when the game is complete, your contract is finished. You're basically fired. You're not allowed to stay in the company unless they decide they want to rehire you or take you on as like a full-time employee. We've seen it time and time again. Developers from studios who make successful titles that are wildly popular are fired and kicked out when their work is finished. For example, see Hi-Fi Rush, or literally any company that EA has acquired. Crazy, man. Like Max's, Black Box, you name it, they've probably shut it down. So just again, as a reminder, there is no system in place to make sure that a piece of the sale of your favorite game goes directly to the person who worked on that game. And in turn, downloading a ROM file of a game that was taken off store shelves 20 years ago does not directly hurt the developer or the company at this point. In my opinion, it's kind of like wanting to see the Mona Lisa. So I pull a picture on Google instead of going to the Louvre, right? Louvre, I don't know how you pronounce it, but you know, the French museum that has it. So if I decide from that picture or from multiple other pictures or other sources that I really love the Mona Lisa, I can always decide to go buy a plane ticket, you know, a couple $1,000s, fly to France, see it in person. But a lot of people are unwilling to do that or do not have the ability to do that. It's just like the same for these games. You know, they cost $200 for what is basically a simple RPG, especially when back in the day they were costing like $40, $20, you know, $60 on the high end. I understand, especially if the rights holders don't give you an easy way to play these games on the modern systems that they currently sell. It just is what it is. like the Ultra Kill developer said, quote, "Culture shouldn't exist only for those who can afford it. Ultra Kill wouldn't exist if I hadn't had easy access to movies, music, and games growing up," unquote. Same goes for me. While I had a Game Boy Advance AGS 101 growing up, that's a console that many argue is the best way to play Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, along with a physical copy of Fire Red. If I wasn't able to download and play a ROM of Fire Red on my computer via the Visual Boy Advance emulator when I was younger, or if I wasn't able to play a Japanese to English translated copy of Pokemon Platinum on my DSSR4 months before the American release, I would have never ended up spending so much money on Nintendo products. Or gotten into video games or technology as a whole. And speaking of ROMs, everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be based on where I live, the US of A, where I am allowed to download a copy of a game that I already own. So since I already own a copy of every single mainline Pokemon game, purchased both brand new and secondhand, I'm either going to be grabbing the ROM files that I personally dumped to my hard drive, or I'll be downloading them from online sources, whichever is more convenient. Now that we got past all that, let's get back to the topic at hand. What is the absolute easiest way to play the Generation 1 line of Pokemon games? It would be this. Using a Game Boy or Game Boy Color emulator on your already existing smartphone or computer. This is because almost anything somewhat modern can run a Game Boy or Game Boy Color emulator, be it a cheap smartphone, a cheap laptop, a cheap tablet. The emulators are usually free to download and install with good accuracy. I remember happily playing Pokemon Red and Crystal on my jailbroken iPod Touch 2nd generation back in the day. If that gives you an idea of what the minimum specs are to run these emulators and these games. This is also a great option if you want the ability to play the games flexibly and if you want to be able to sync your save files to the cloud easily. It's also great for introducing others to the medium because the barrier of entry is just so low. All you need to do is download and install the app, source the ROM file, load it, and Bob's your uncle. Which leads me into a small recommendation to further level up this setup. You can purchase a simple Bluetooth controller with 2 face buttons, a D-pad, LR shoulder buttons, and a start and select button. Or, if you don't want to purchase a new controller and you already have a spare Xbox or PlayStation controller lying around, you can connect that up to your phone or computer. And that way, you'll be pressing physical tactile buttons instead of the virtual ones under a uniform sheet of glass or plastic that doesn't provide any physical feedback. For a game like Pokemon, it might not be needed, but if you decide you'd like to try out other games in other genres, like Pokemon Pinball or a platformer like Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. That's Game Boy Color, right? Yeah, whatever. You get the idea. Or Super Mario Land, right? Yeah, that's Game Boy 1. But my main point is that it will be a big step up in terms of playability. That being said, it's not impossible to play an entire game like that on a touchscreen. Rewinding back to that jailbroken iPod Touch, I actually beat Super Mario Bros. 3 in a few weeks, playing on an NES emulator on my iPod's touchscreen. It's possible, but not ideal. But if all you do in Pokemon is press A and walk around, then a gamepad won't really make a huge difference. And if you want to connect your green, red, blue, yellow copies to the N64 Pokemon Stadium games, the Project 64 emulator can emulate the transfer pack using a .gb or .gbc file and a .save file. So you can connect your save files up to the N64 games and get stuff like the Surfing Pikachu. But before we go any further, I want to give an honorable mention to the SBC. Now, you might not be familiar with what the SBC is. It stands for Single Board Computer. Think of it like a Raspberry Pi, kind of like a whole computer on like a tiny little PCB. And instead of just running, whatever you want to run on a Raspberry Pi, these ones are specifically designed to run emulators. Like an example of this I have is the Ambernic something or another. I forget the model number, but it's basically shaped like a Game Boy Advance SP. I believe it costs around $80 or $90. Requires an SD card. I believe you can choose whether it comes with an SD card, like like supplied with one, or if it just comes without one and you supply your own. So for this case, talking about Game Boy games, I would say it's the best of both worlds. So the reason I say it's the best of both worlds is even though these particular SBCs, they don't run every emulator all that well. Honestly, they start kind of falling apart at like PS1. But for running Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and even Game Boy Advance games, like I said earlier, modern devices can emulate those consoles no problem. For an SBC that costs between $60 to $90 US, not a bad option if you just want to see if you enjoy the form factor or if owning a console like this fits in your own particular use case. For me personally, I would just pick up a secondhand AGS 001 and play on real Game Boy hardware. But that's just because I already know what I prefer. But if you prefer real hardware as well, you'll want to stick around for our next few topics. So, let's say you want to go to the next level. That is, you want to play the games on actual Game Boy hardware, or as close to it as possible. Assuming you already have a DMG Game Boy or a CGB Game Boy Color console, the absolute cheapest option would be picking up a reproduction, aka a bootleg cartridge off AliExpress, Alibaba, Ali this or that, Taobao, any of those similar sites. You get the idea. That's right. Cart Nights aren't the only carts being sold on Ali. Reproduction Game Boy cartridges are too. God, do they still sell that stuff on Ali? I hope not. Okay, but what these bootlegs really are parts of recycled electronic waste repurposed into a single file rewritable flashcart. And if you're wondering what a flashcart is, it's a cartridge that can be flashed and rewritten with different ROM files multiple times. And as a plus, with modern bootlegs, they typically have no batteries. What I mean by that is in the original genuine cartridges, or very, very, very old bootlegs. I'm talking like bootlegs released around the 2000s, back when the games were still at the height of their popularity. In both cases, the save file in the cartridge is being kept alive by the battery that's also inside the cartridge. The unfortunate part of that is if the battery runs out, your save file goes with it. Now compare that to modern bootlegs that store the save file alongside the game file in the empty space left available after the game file is flashed to the cartridge. That means you don't need to worry about your save file being erased after a battery goes flat because there is no battery to run flat. That's handy, as theoretically you could leave the cart out for a long time and not worry about the save file disappearing because there's no battery to run out. And if you're wondering about price, you can find a single Game Boy reproduction cartridge on AliExpress or Alibaba for around $4 USD a piece, with shipping included. Word of warning though, I've seen some retro stores and some vending machines sell the exact same bootlegs available on the Aldi's for $20 and $30 a piece. You should never pay more than $7 US for a single cartridge. Don't get scammed. Don't get scammed by buying those. $20 and $30, crazy, dude. Especially because if you buy for that price, you're still going to have to go through the issues I'm about to list. Alright, so low price and high availability. What's the catch? Well, remember how I praised the bootleg cartridges for having no batteries to worry about? So the save files on the cartridge don't have a time limit on them? Well, because the genuine games do have a battery to keep the save data alive, that introduces incompatibilities, meaning you are unable to connect the bootleg cartridges to other devices, such as an N64 running Pokemon Stadium, in case you wanted to access or back up or play with your team in Pokemon Stadium, or play through the game using the GB Tower, or when using a tool to dump the save file from the cartridge like a GBxCart RW by insideGadgets or a Joey Jr. by BennVenn. So that means unless you specifically have the knowledge and know-how to pull save files off these bootleg cartridges, they're there to stay forever. You can't transfer them digitally, you can't save them. You can, but you have to know how to. You can't just do it out of the box with any of the easily accessible tools, unfortunately. And another point, because these bootlegs are made from e-waste in unauthorized, unlicensed factories, reliability and quality control is super hit or miss. You might get one that lasts for 2 weeks. You might get one that lasts for 2 months, 2 years, 20 years. You don't know. You can't know. Even they don't know. For me personally, I purchased 2 bootlegs from the same cardboard bin in a shop outside of a train station in Hong Kong. Those were Pokemon Green 2, that's right, 2. Yeah, I know they made a 1, but I didn't know they made a 2. And Mega Man X something. I'll put it up on the screen. Both never held a save file after powering off, but my Mega Man bootleg still boots up and plays to this day, while my Pokemon Green bootleg died a little while after I started uploading to this channel around 4 or 5 years ago at this point. So if it's reliability and compatibility that you're looking for, bootlegs are not the way to go. Instead, if you plan to put serious hours into the save file and beat the Elite Four, collect all the Pokemon, complete the Pokedex, do all the extracurricular activities after, the Elite Four, yeah, don't try to do it on a bootleg. Instead, just keep watching. We'll go over some better hardware you can use for that. But if you just like to try the games out, just to see if you like them, or you like to use it as a cheap display piece, or you plan to use it as a throwaway game, as in the one where you don't care about the save file, you just use it to restart, to get all the restarters, one that you don't care if it gets erased, because you just don't. A bootleg would be a good option for that. But if you're looking for a single ROM flash cart, but with the reliability and compatibility of an official, genuine, authentic cartridge, may I introduce to you the BennVenn and insideGadgets line of flash carts. I'll go ahead and put a screen recording of the shop here. But if you don't know who Ben or Alex is, they're 2 Australians who are crazy into retro hardware. Alex from insideGadgets mainly focuses on Game Boy and Game Boy Advanced hardware, while Ben focuses on a large variety of stuff, from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, of course, to the Sega Game Gear, all the way to the Atari Lynx. Very cool stuff coming from both of them. If that's the type of thing that piques your curiosity, go ahead and check out all their categories on their storefronts. You're bound to find something interesting. But the great part about either of their single ROM flash cards are that they are Pokemon Stadium compatible, 1 and 2. The batteries in the cartridges are only used to count the real-time clock, and as a bonus, they use a coin cell holder and include a CR1220 or a 2025 battery, depending on who you buy from, with the cartridge. So if the battery goes out, the only thing that happens is the in-game clock stops ticking up. Your save file remains unaffected, and because they're made with high-quality parts, not e-waste, they're reliable and made to last. And they'll probably last as long as the original Nintendo cartridges, if not longer. So, great compatibility, and they're reliable. What's the catch? First one would be cost. No, not the cost of the cartridges. Those are quite reasonable. They range between $15 to $35. More, it's the cost of the shipping. Now, do understand this is not their fault. That's just how much it costs for small businesses to ship things from Australia. Don't forget, it is an island and prices are jacked up accordingly. You can ask New Zealand or like Philippines, Japan, any of those island countries, and they'll let you know. But luckily, insideGadgets, they've added a new shipping thing. So now you can choose like a $6 or $9 option if you're only buying 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 items from their store. Before, it would have cost like $15, $16, even if it was just one thing. But if you prefer to buy from a store that's located in the same region you're in, they do list official resellers on their website. insideGadgets, they list their resellers on the GBxCart.com website, the website that's specifically for the GBxCart RW. So those are going to be Retro Game Repair Shop and Retro Modding in the US. And if you're in the EU, that's going to be Z Labs and Mod in France. Though I believe Z Labs is out of stock at the moment. For BennVenn, you got a reseller in the US, High Score Tech Supply. And if you're in the EU, you got 2. Z Labs, again, or Video Game Perfection. Another catch, I would say, would be the requirement for a cartridge flasher. Now, this is not required if you don't ever plan on switching the ROM file on the flash cart. If you only plan to play 1 game, then yeah, you don't ever have to you don't have to buy one because you don't ever have to switch it. If you do plan on switching the game file that's on the flash cart, like if you finish game, switch from red to blue to yellow, whatever, For insideGadgets, they have a model of a flash card called the Link and Load where it has a USB port built in, but that's a little more expensive. Not sure if that's something that you want to pay extra for. And unfortunately, I don't believe the flash cards are cross-compatible with their accompanying flashers. You can't flash a insideGadgets flash card on a Joey Jr. You can't flash a BennVenn flash card on a GBxCart RW. You gotta match the manufacturers, I guess, the creators. And while we're on the topic of the cartridge flasher, if you decide you want to use it, you plug the cartridge into the Joey Jr. and then the Joey Jr. into your computer or your smartphone or tablet, whatever you're using, and it'll just show up like a USB flash drive or any other external drive. You don't need to install any drivers or programs. But for the GBxCart, you'll need to install the Flash GBX software. And similar to the Joey, plug the cartridge into the GBxCart, plug the GBxCart into the computer via USB, and then launch the Flash GBX program. Now, depending on you, that could be another con, having to install another piece of software to use it. But as a plus, Flash GBX shows a lot more information about the cartridge. So I believe it shows the boot logo, shows the cartridge type, it shows the save type, it shows the ROM file that's on it. A bunch of info that, frankly, the Joey Jr. can't, out of the box at least, because it only shows up as a USB drive. But if the Flash GBX experience is something that you're interested in and you want the Joey Jr., BennVenn is also beta testing Joey GUI, which is basically Flash GBX but for the Joey Jr. So turned it from a USB external hard drive to a program that tells you a lot more information about the cartridge itself. Pros and cons, you got to decide which you're okay with. Honestly, you can't really go wrong with either of them. Oh, and while we're on the subject of the GBxCart, make sure you purchase an official one by insideGadgets. Don't purchase a clone made in China from the Ali sites. Mako has a video going in depth on why you shouldn't. But long story short, they're the same as the single ROM bootleg flash cards. The clones can be really unreliable and compatibility is hit or miss. And the seller is quite often hard to reach after some time. So that means you can plug in your cartridge with your 100-hour save file into a bootleg GBxCart, and it might erase the 100-hour save file on the cartridge while backing up a gibberish, corrupted file to your computer. Not to mention, AliExpress dispute team has been on some serious BS lately. Like, I don't know what's going on. It used to be that if a product was defective, they're like, okay, you can keep it, you can throw it away, whatever. But nowadays, they're forcing customers to return items, ship them back to their warehouse, and then they just don't say anything for like 2 months. When you ask them about the status of the return, they're like, oh, this item was sent wrong. We lost the thing. We don't have it. We're not giving you your money back. It used to be if you bought from AliExpress or whatever, you were guaranteed a refund, basically, if anything was wrong. But at this point, the only thing that's guaranteed is the credit card dispute or your bank dispute, because I don't know what their team is on, man. It's become so unreliable. So I would recommend you just buy from the official source, who's quality control checked it, who stands by the product, who will give you a warranty and won't just tuck away their tail and like delete their storefront and everything after a few months. But whichever flash card and cartridge flasher combination that you decide to buy, either from insideGadgets or from BennVenn, you really can't go wrong. Both will work the exact same when it comes to playing both the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color Pokemon games. So, just for the sake of your sanity, pick up an official GBxCart RW, not a bootleg. But let's say you didn't want a single ROM flash card, because that requires you to plug into a computer every time you want to change the game you want to play. You want something that you can load up once and work indefinitely. Well, let me introduce you to flash cards with SD card slots. You've probably seen these type of flash cards around, especially if you're in the homebrew scene. The most popular Game Boy and Game Boy Color flash cards being the Easy Flash Jr. by the Easy Flash team, and the GB Everdrive X3, X5, and X7 by Krikzz. The difference between a single ROM flash card and an SD-based flash card is that the game files and save data are stored on the removable SD card instead of being stored in the cartridge itself, only accessible by plugging into a flasher. So the pros of this means you can have as many game files on your SD card as you want, as much as the SD card can hold, and as stated earlier, you'll be able to switch between the games you're playing at will. So some cons include increased battery usage compared to single ROM flashcards or authentic genuine cartridges. That means you'll get less hours of playtime on the same set of batteries on the same console. Another con is you are not able to plug in the SD based flashcard into the transfer pack and connect it up to Pokemon Stadium. And that's because the Pokemon Stadium game expects the Pokemon Green, Red, Blue, Yellow game file ROM to be the first one that's loaded. It doesn't know what to do when the flashcards OS is the first one to load instead of the game ROM. So unfortunately, that will not work. And the fact that the SD-based flashcards do retail for a little higher than their single ROM counterparts, all while requiring the extra separate purchase of an SD card. And with the introduction of an SD card, that adds an additional point of failure if you pick the wrong SD card. But while we're on the topic, let me go on a little tangent regarding purchasing good quality SD cards. The main way I ensure I am receiving good quality authentic SD cards is to either purchase the SD cards directly from the manufacturer's website. So they usually have a web store. You can purchase the SD cards like directly from them. Or you purchase the SD cards from the Amazon listing that states sold by Amazon.com, shipped by Amazon.com. Basically, that just tells you the stock is coming from Amazon's own warehouse. So they're far less likely to make mistakes and send fake bad quality SD cards compared to the random litany of third-party sellers out there. But either way, if you purchase from the manufacturer's website, if you purchase from Amazon, what you want to do after you receive the SD cards is you want to unbox them, take them out, plug them into an SD card adapter to USB adapter, and plug them into your computer, and then test the SD card itself using a utility like h2testw.exe. Just to verify that the SD card works and can store data reliably. And if you're unsure how to exactly use the program, you can check out this link for instructions on how to use it, or alternative programs if you're on Linux or Mac OS. Alright, but getting back to the topic at hand, the price. So the Easy Flash Junior costs between $35 and $55 USD, depending on where you buy it from. And it works with both green, red, blue, and yellow, and gold, silver, crystal. As for the Everdrive, it has varying prices depending on which model you purchase. The X3 costs $44 USD, X5 costs $60, and the X7 costs $135. All these prices are directly from Krikzz website without fees or shipping calculated. And if you plan to play the Pokemon games on an Everdrive, you'll need at least a GB Everdrive X3 or X5 for green, red, blue, and yellow. But if you want to play gold, silver, or crystal, you're going to want to purchase the Everdrive GBx7 because the X3 and X5 do not have a battery inside to keep track of the real-time clock. So despite the price hike compared to insideGadgets or BennVenn's flashcard offerings, they are very convenient if you plan to play the entire catalog of Pokemon games all without switching the cartridge you're using, or without having to plug into a computer to change. Now, me personally, I am paranoid of the thought of something damaging all my individual game cartridges and killing the save files on them. So I prefer to keep a backup of all my games and their accompanying save files on the SD card of my flash card. So an SD-based flash card works great for me, as I don't have to keep track of so many individual cartridges, and it allows me to easily access the backups I made of the cartridges. And with the ability to make copies of files, it allows me to start new save files without having to erase the older ones. However, if you are unable to afford either an Everdrive or Easy Flash, AliExpress has you covered. They got the Game Flash GB Pro Plus, a clone of the Everdrive GB. I believe X3, X5. I'm not sure, honestly. They're not exactly upfront about this type of stuff. So the bootleg Everdrives, they cost around $10 to $25 USD. And while I have heard they work similar to Everdrive, X3 or X5, you're going to have to do your own research on this one, as I'm not too familiar with like the multitude of clones available to buy. There's a lot of different models out there. So fortunately, you're going to have to do your own research and find out which specific one will work the best for the game you want to play. If it were just up to me and you were going to buy such a thing from AliExpress, honestly, I would just save up the extra cash for like a month or two and just purchase an Easy Flash Junior. Because by purchasing an Easy Flash Junior or an Everdrive GB, you're purchasing something with a brand behind it. If you have any issues further down the road, there's a good chance you're able to find the contact information of the company who produced the flash cart, and the company will try to assist you in solving the issue. I mean, Krikzz and the Easy Flash team have been around since the early 2000s, unlike an AliExpress seller who can just close up their storefront at any given point in time and just scurry off, leaving you high and dry. But I do understand that not everyone has the ability or luxury to purchase from either the Easy Flash team or from Krikzz. So I mentioned this option for those people whose only option is to either purchase a clone or purchase nothing at all, just not play. But I figure I should give this word of warning for anyone who does decide they do want to play on the GB Game Flash GB Pro Plus. Do not try to flash an updated version of the official Krikzz firmware onto the clone, or you'll just brick the cartridge and no one will be able to help you except telling you to buy a new one. I'm not even aware there's a fix for it, honestly. There's just so many variants. It's just, I don't know. Unfortunately, if you decide you want to go down this route, you're gonna have to do your own research. And before we switch gears into discussing options for the N64, let's give an honorable mention to the Goomba emulator. That's the emulator that runs Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on Game Boy Advance flashcarts. So, if you already have an Easy Flash Omega or an Everdrive GBA X5 or X5 Mini, you could use it as a Game Boy Color flashcart. Now, I wouldn't recommend using Goomba as your primary emulator because its compatibility is not great. And a lot of popular games such as Pokemon Crystal, they don't run stably. But if you just want to try a game, or you want to play a game like it's an arcade machine, play for 5 minutes, hop off. Or if like your little cousin's like, hey, you got games on your Game Boy? Well, it's pretty convenient. And it doesn't require any extra hardware if you already have a GBA flash card, so. Alright, so moving on to the N64. N64, just like the Game Boy, has their own reproduction single ROM flashcarts widely available online. Unfortunately, just like their Game Boy counterparts, they also have similar build quality and quality control issues. Plus, just like the Game Boy ones, they've been modified so they're not compatible with the original Game Boy games. So you won't be able to connect a bootleg copy of Pokemon Stadium or Stadium 2 to your single ROM flashcart with red, green, blue, or yellow. But the entire point of Pokemon Stadium games is to connect your Game Boy games up to it. So, honestly, I'm not even going to talk about this. I'm just going to skip past it completely. Except, I'm going to tell you, the prices are around the same as a Game Boy reproduction cartridge, a bootleg cartridge. They're around, $7, $10, $12. Don't overpay like $20, $30, $40 for one. Just don't. They're not even good display pieces, honestly, because the labels that they print on suck. So I would just use an empty shell and print out your own label if you want a higher quality display piece. As for SD-based flashcards for the N64, there's the Summer Cart 64, an open source flashcart for the N64. Now, I haven't used it myself, but Pokemon Stadiums 1 and 2 will work, and it's compatible with the transfer pack. The only problem I really see with it is actually finding one, or finding one that meets the design documents listed on the summercart64.dev website, because it doesn't seem like the creator of the Summer Cart 64 sells their own assembled boards. It seems like a bunch of manufacturers and sellers on online websites are just taking the design documents and making it themselves to sell online. And that's fine, but from one seller to the next, you don't know if they're going to switch out components, they're going to leave out components, you don't know the compatibility. So I can't guarantee any compatibility, unfortunately. You're going to have to do your own research regarding that. I'm sure the Discord will help you out if you need any help with that, but I don't know. If you're looking for something more name brand and with an actual storefront behind it, there's also the Everdrive N64 line of flashcards. There's the Everdrive 64 X5 and the Everdrive 64 X7. X5 costs $100 USD and the X7 costs $160 USD without shipping or fees directly from Krikz's website. Now, when it comes to Pokemon Stadium compatibility, you're in good luck because the Everdrive 64 X5 can run both Pokemon Stadiums 1 and 2. The X7 can also run Pokemon Stadiums 1 and 2 no problem, and it has a built-in RTC battery for one Animal Crossing for the N64, aka Dobutsu no Mori. Pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. And the second benefit of having that RTC battery is so it can hold the save file until next time you power on the console, then it writes to the SD card, so you don't have to reset the console each time you save and want to power off. As far as the RTC battery and I believe a development port, I might be wrong on that. I don't think there's any like functional difference between the X5 and the X7, so if you're purely looking to run Pokemon Stadiums 1 and 2, you can do fine with the X5. But if you're on a tight budget or are unable to purchase from Krikzz, you can thank the Allies for swooping in to save the day again. Because you can go to AliExpress or Alibaba, whichever one you want, and you can go and search up the ED64 Plus, also known as the Super 64. What it is basically a clone of Krikz's flashcards, I believe, either the X5 or like the older version of the X5. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know the lore. And if you're wondering what the difference between the ED64 Plus and the Super 64 is, the ED64 has a black shell. The Super 64 has a red shell. And that's it. That's all the difference is. Pick whichever one's cheap. It honestly doesn't matter. So some things to note, obviously same as the Game Boy and the N64 bootleg cartridges or the GBxCart RW clones. These are clones. They're not guaranteed to work for a long time. Just long enough so it fails outside of the return or warranty period. Another thing is that its software hasn't seen an update since 2019, and I'm pretty sure you can't flash Krikz's official software. I believe there's another OS, Alt OS for it, but I heard it's also not compatible with Pokemon Stadiums 1 or 2, so there's no point in talking about that, is there? Oh, and finally, both the ED64 Plus and the Super 64 come with its own SD card, I believe. 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes. I'm not going to say throw it away because that would be wasteful, but I do recommend you stash it in your spare SD card collection. The collection of SD cards that you use to only hold 1 or 2 files that you already have backups of and do not care if they die or stop working. If it dies, oh well, you just grab another one and you grab another copy of the file. Definitely don't use it as your main SD card because, again, they're built to work for a certain amount of time, especially SD cards. They've got a limited lifespan, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, just go ahead and put it away and buy yourself a reliable, trusted SD card. So, fair bit of cons, but it can kind of be excused for costing only between $35 to $50 US. And yeah, I know it's a clone, but sometimes you don't have the ability to buy the latest, greatest, best original thing. You just gotta buy what you can. But if you do have the ability to, I would purchase an Everdrive just because Krikzz will stand behind their product. So, now that we've gone over all the different types of hardware you can get, what combination of hardware and software can we put together to achieve the best possible experience? The cheapest setup you can get away with is using an emulator on a modern smartphone or computer, and then transferring the game file and the save file to an N64 emulator like Project 64 whenever you wish to use the transfer pack with Pokemon Stadium. That's the absolute cheapest way because it costs basically no money at all. But if you're really, really low on cash, or you just don't want to invest a ton of money into something you're not sure you'd enjoy, you could just go for the single ROM bootleg flashcards from Ali, whatever, the ones that cost around $4 to $7, plus a Joey Jr. or a GBxCart RW cartridge flasher. I believe they're around the same price, and that will allow you to switch the game file that's on the cartridge, so you can see for yourself if you really enjoy the games. However, you will not be able to connect it to the N64 games, of course, and you'll need to patch every single game, or every single Pokemon game at least, if you want to play it on that cartridge, because there's no battery, and the game's usually looking for a battery. Otherwise, you could spend a little bit more money and go for a high quality single ROM flash cart from the likes of insideGadgets and BennVenn, plus their matching flasher, and you can pair that with a Super 64. That'll get you 90% of the way there while spending way less. And if you're not on a budget, you just want something with the best reliability, best compatibility, I don't care about the cost, you get one high quality single ROM flash cart from BennVenn or insideGadgets, plus their matching flasher. On top of that, you can get an SD based flash card, so you can swap between which games you're playing on the fly, plus an Everdrive 64 X5 or X7, or a well-built summer cart 64. I think you could probably find like people crowdfunding to produce X amount of units on the Discord. And even better, if you do decide to go with an Everdrive, you can just go for the Everdrive X5, because all we really care about is Pokemon Stadium. We are playing Animal Crossing, and the save reset feature of the X7 goes away when the battery inside eventually dies. But, whichever way you do decide you want to play these games, no wrong way to do it, as long as you're having fun. These options are nice to have, but it's totally not a requirement to have anything super duper fancy, especially since the early Pokemon games have a really simple control scheme. There's not a lot of complicated button inputs you need to press. So, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions, concerns, or you just want to tell us the setup or combination of hardware and software you're using, feel free to leave it down in the comment section. And if you found this video helpful, feel free to subscribe, because I'm still trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. But stay tuned for part 2, where I will be going over the second generation Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Because yes, Gold and Silver can be played on the Game Boy, and I'll actually have some physical props to show off next time. But until then, bye for now.